All right, now for the fun part, planning out your puzzles. I think the most important thing when planning out your puzzles is to keep in mind that you are telling a story. If your content area doesn't blend storytelling as easy as perhaps history and English do, then make a story up. Why can't students have an epic adventure in their math class, or use the skills they've learned in chemistry to save the world from some big catastrophe? Remember back in step number 2 when we identified the specific chunks students needed to learn from your lesson? Well, those steps you identified are going to become the outline for your escape room. That is exactly what I did with my Race to Space activity. Students are going to themselves play through the story arc, starting with the Sputnik launch, which will catapult them into the game, and then they will solve some puzzles, but always just being behind the Soviets until finally they solve the final challenge and land people on the moon. I personally chose to use Google Forms for this escape room as a digital way of measuring students' progress throughout the game. You could very easily create a worksheet that students fill out as they solve each puzzle, but I am personally a big fan of Google Forms because it saves me paper and time. You can see how I've taken the first chunk of information that my students need to know about the space race, and I've used that to launch my game. Students will be introduced to this game with the knowledge that Sputnik sent NASA into a frenzy and the race to the moon begins. Once you figure out how you're going to launch your story, you're going to want to decide just how many puzzles you want to give your students. Remember, you know your students best. You'll want to provide some puzzles that are easier, and I suggest you put easy puzzles first to build their confidence with something new. You will want to keep in mind how much time you have for this activity and have a general idea of how long each puzzle could take your students. It's perfectly normal for some students to finish ahead of their peers, and you might even see some students don't even make it to the final puzzle within the time period. You might want to give your students a set number of hints that they can use throughout the game. That way, if there's a group you think might need a little extra help, you can hand them more hints for them to use. I've personally set up my space race with 4 puzzles, and it took roughly 60 minutes to complete. I think it's important to incorporate movement with this activity as much as possible, and I'm going to go ahead and walk you through my space race puzzles now. So my first puzzle was for students to find a missing flash drive. This was hidden throughout the room, and because I'm cheap, I didn't actually use real flash drives. They were small paper boxes with the word flash drive written on it. Personally, I chose not to give them any real clues as to where the flash drives were hidden. I just told them they would be in plain sight. I really don't recommend hiding stuff in your drawers unless you want your students to literally tear your room apart. But great hiding places include under students' desks, behind the projector screen, on top of your clock, your iPad cart, even in your blinds. Do be careful hiding stuff in your blinds, though. Mine are permanently dented from my student, Claudia, who was so excited. She jumped up and grabbed the key I had taped in them to win the game for her team. So once each group found a flash drive, they saw inside instructions for how to create a paper rocket using some supplies I had already previously had and had laid out in the classroom. That was a straw, paper, and some tape. They had to create a rocket that would fly at least 10 feet using those materials. When they proved they launched their rocket successfully, I personally gave them a code word that they would then go back and enter on that Google form I was talking about earlier, giving them access to puzzle number 3. Now, puzzle number 3 was a pretty classic escape room type challenge. I had set up an area in the classroom that had a mysterious locked box on the desk, and it was an alpha lock, meaning it's a 4-letter code that would open it. Students had to explore this area to find a clue as to what the 4-letter word was. And that leads me to my favorite part, which was puzzle number 4. When students opened the lockbox, inside they found another clue and an odd object. The clue was total nonsense. I just made it up. But on the paper, I had wrote with a UV pen the actual final clue. The object they found in the box was a UV light. So students needed to shine the light on the clue to read what they actually needed to do in order to solve the final puzzle. I'm going to also add a link to the Google form on the Step 4 module page. Just know that I've taken away the password requirement so you can flip through the puzzles without actually inputting the correct clues. And Google Forms allows you to use something called response validation, so students need an actual password to move on. And I'll link a video on how to do that as well. But what I really want you guys to know is there's just so many types of puzzles you can bring into your classroom. I am a big fan of this simple locked box puzzle. It's visual, it's kind of mysterious. There are different types of locks you can use. Your simple lock and key, to an alpha lock, a number code lock. I've already mentioned using flash drives, whether they're real or fake, UV lights, building things, searching for hidden objects in the room. But some other examples of puzzles that use fairly little equipment could include magnifying glass that can show tiny little bits of text that you might hide in a photo. You could try giving students a letter or number for each task they solve, which they then collect along the way to unlock your final puzzle. You could use their phones, iPads, like whatever technology you have in your room to scan QR codes that are hidden, which will lead them to specific web pages, or even just have them use technology to research the information. You can create ciphers or even write in a secret code. This is the step where your creativity can really be used to create some super cool experiences. And they also don't need to be limited to your classroom. If you're able to expand the game into your hallway or even your entire school. I'll be sharing a link to some escape room resources you might want to invest in, but don't be afraid to use what you already have. In fact, some of the best puzzles come from objects students are quite used to seeing every single day, and they don't stick out as a game prop. One of my best ever hiding spots has come from a construction error. My air conditioning unit actually comes right out of the wall. It works, it's just not secure, and it is the best place to hide small objects. If you want to know what the top 3 choices I recommend having for escape rooms, it would be some sort of lock, some sort of box that you can lock, and that UV pen with the light. With those 3 objects, you just have so many possibilities. And I want to leave you with this. It's going to be uncomfortable at first. And I mean that for both you and your students. We don't ask our students as much as we probably should have to problem solve and just figure things out. And finding that balance of challenging them without overwhelming them could take a couple tries. The first escape room I ever made started with a cipher code. That's where you shift the alphabet a set number in order to decode a phrase. It was way more challenging than I thought it was going to be. I gave out lots more hints than I expected to because they just weren't connecting the dots I thought they would. Now I've used that same code again, but I know how to scaffold it better, and it's less frustrating for both of us. At the end of the day, your room might be a mess, and a few puzzles may have missed the mark, but I promise it's totally worth it, and it gets easier every time.